England Euro 96. When football came home, nearly. Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to work out once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, as ever, putting the case for Oxford United, and joining me in our data nerve centre is Jamie Rooney.
Graham, here we are, like London buses. We haven't done an England team up until a few weeks ago, and then two come along at once. And instead of being a giddy little school kid, as we were in 1982, we've now discovered alcohol, and we're living in 96, a period of time where that long-standing, much maligned Conservative government is clinging on to hopes to win a general election based on the success of the England football team. I mean, we're never going to live through that again, are we?
Yes, there's definitely some mirrors and echoes there. So a few weeks ago, we did do England 1982, which I think we're all agreed was 35 seconds of genius with Brian Robson's goal, and the rest of it broadly just the point to. And now we get to a super exciting story, which of course is Euro 96. And it's a story sort of everyone is super familiar with. But joining us this week, we've got a guy who was sort of close to the most actually to that. So joining us is Steve Double. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Graham. Hello, Jamie.
So you sort of had a kind of a bird's eye view of all of this.
Yeah, I was lucky. I was at the time I head of media relations for the FA, so I was effectively press officer for the England team at that time. I joined, I think, about previous September, October time. We'd had this succession of fairly meaningless friendlies. You might remember that Alan Shearer hadn't scored since God knows when, and part of the league now where people were calling for him to be dropped from the squad, and it wasn't the sort of the dream run up really. Which and I have to say, all subsequent tournaments, I'm not in favour of being run ups, because I tend to think that the more you can lower the expectations, the better. And the England team in '96 did a fantastic job of that. Whether you look at the middling the results or the dentist chair in Hong Kong. Just before the start, Tony Adams was... England were getting absolutely battered in the press, mainly for the antics in Hong Kong. And Tony Adams being quite, nodding sagely and saying, yeah, this is good. He said, siege mentality, this is what you want. And it was a classic, Arsenal captain outlook. He's actually quite happy, but the team was getting battered from the outside. And, the players thought the world was against them. Tragedy, it seemed like it was at the time. So it was an interesting build-up.
It hadn't occurred to me, but because England were the host side, of course they're not playing any competitive matches, are they?
No, whole string of friendlies, and not from memory, against any particular top sides. And the trip to China was better for our side. It was a bit odd, really. What the hell were we doing out in the Far East just before the tournament?
It's quite odd, isn't it, that actually in hindsight, for a European competition where you're playing against European opposition, heading off to China is a bit odd.
It was a real eye-opener for all sorts of reasons. I'm still kicking myself because I could have gone out on that infamous night to the dentist chair, and I was one of the few who stayed behind. I'm trying to work out when. We were staying in this magnificent hotel. It was the Mandarin Oriental in Hong Kong, which pretty sure was the finest hotel I've ever stayed in. It was magnificent. It was England's, I think, last game that's played. I've been really busy. I've been out with the press pack a few nights before, and frankly, I was knackered. So I fancied a quiet night in. Of course, the players and the staff, for them, it was right. This is our last chance to go out, and so they did. I stayed at the hotel bar with, unsurprisingly, the Neville brothers, and
they didn't go out.
Don Howe. Don Howe was the late Don Howe was an absolute walking, talking football encyclopedia. He was just amazing. And, you know, he would talk football to anybody about anything all night. You know, if you want to know everything there is to know about Switzerland's third choice left back, speak to Don Howe. He just knew it all, you know. And I remember Brian Robson came up and he said, right, he said, tonight I'm a player again. What's he mean by that? I thought, I know what he means by that. He went out. He went out with a player supposedly as a chaperone, and of course that was not quite sure what the right expression was.
I have to ask on that, Steve. Being a Manchester United fan and seeing that Alex Ferguson coming in and breaking up the drinking culture, which Brian Robson was absolutely front and centre of. Terry Venables' choice to send Brian Robson out as the chaperone to look after the players on a night out on the source. I love Terry Venables. I think he's an absolute genius. But his decision making then was either one that he knew what was going to happen, or he just he slipped up a little bit.
No, frankly, you know, I mean, to be honest, Terry on that side of things, he didn't care, but he took a pretty relaxed view of things. You know, he may have been ahead of his time football coach, but he was very old school in terms of letting the players let their hair down when the time was right, etc.
If I remember rightly, Steve, as well, they went out on the night after they played their final warm-up game, which again was against that strange selection of Hong Kong Golden Select players, which featured some absolute strange selection. Mike Duxbury of Manchester United fame, I think it was about 36, was in that team. Colton Fairweather, you know, that tall forward that played at Wimbledon, was in there. And then I think it was just a couple of Chinese restaurant workers potentially making up the numbers as well. It seemed a bizarre fixture for England to be participating in on the back of what was going to be their first, as we mentioned, their first competitive game since San Marino in November 1993, that famous game where San Marino scored after 7 seconds.
Wow. Yeah. I'd like to tell you I can remember every detail of that game, but I can't because it was a total irrelevance. The other thing I remember, of course, I don't even remember that the whole dentist chair episode didn't get reported on at the time until about 2 or 3 days after the team got back. The reason it didn't get reported on is because the football press were in the same bar doing the same thing. So it was just, they weren't about to turn on their own. Anyway, I had a relatively early night, and the next day, the final day, there was one more press event, and it was Peter Beardsley's farewell press conference, because Terry had told him ahead of time he wasn't going to make the cut, and he'd had a fantastic England career. So he was given the chance to bow out, basically, out in Hong Kong. And so I think that was like a late morning press conference for him to, you know, say thank him good night. And I knew it had been a heavy night, and I saw the press guys turn up. It was like watching an episode of The Walking Dead. You know, they were completely wrecked. And so the players I saw actually saw at the time, but the press guys were absolutely wiped out and could barely sort of, move their pens over their notepads, you know, to take it all off. And that was that. So can I remember some, you know, blistering football moments from the China Hong Kong tour? No, I can't. Not a single one. The other notable thing was that Phil and Gary Neville playing together against China for the first time. I mean, first time brothers had married to the Khan brothers, I think. Well, I think they were the English ones. But yeah, that was a strange experience in Beijing. And the fact that Chinese were actually, the Chinese Secret Service had the players' rooms blocked as well. Oh wow! Which was really weird. It was. I remember talking to somebody at the hotel reception, and I can't remember how it arose. But they just told me as a matter of fact way, oh yes, well we're in such and such a room, in that room, in that room, in that room. So right there, oh look at it. So listen, you know, it was accepted that, you know, the Chinese authorities were going to listen in. Yeah, that was Beijing.
I'd love to be in the fly on the wall where they were translating Paul Gascoigne's Geordie English into something Mandarin. That would have been fantastic.
Yeah. No, that reminded me of another thing about Gazza, was that Yeah, so there was a trip to a chance to go to this Great Wall of China, which is, by and large, you don't get to see every day. The whole squad went, with the exception of Gazza and Dennis Wise, because they decided they would rather play cards in that hotel reception.
No wonder they were border cards on that flight back, that they wanted to have a drink on the flight back instead.
Yeah. That was the other thing. One of my professional embarrassments was, we're on that flight home, and you had the staff and the coaches, and one part of Cathay Pacific 747, and the players were, I think, up in a bubble upstairs, and we all landed at Heathrow, and I went home in West London, thinking perfectly normal flight, no problem there. I think we landed at dawn at Heathrow. I went home, crashed out, woke up at 2:00 in the afternoon, put my phone on, and found about 40 voicemail messages in the days where it's ITN here. We'd like to talk to you about this incident on the plane. What incident? On what plane? What are they talking about? And I think the England team were the victim of a bit of a stitch up by Cathay Pacific, actually, because by and large, and I know this because I went on to work for British Airways. After every long haul flight, you have a certain amount of damage. It's just part of the course. On this flight, there was one depressed TV screen, and that was the extent of the damage. And of course, Cathay Pacific tipped off the press that there'd been mayhem on this flight, which they would never do in normal circumstances. But I think they saw it as a sort of random PR opportunity and took it. I don't know if you remember, there was this who was to blame. Everybody knew who was to blame, but nobody was going to step forward and take it. And then Terry very wisely came up with this collective responsibility line, which sounds, the classic politician's answer. Well, he did. It sort of, there was a bit of fury for a couple of days, but then it passed over. But you just, certainly back at the team, you just needed the tournament to start, because you have this nonsense before every tournament. And and this was different, because we are still talking about it, 28 years later. People do remember it. But there's always a pre-tournament incident of some sort that gets confronted,
it's kind of filling the gap, isn't it? It's filling that, it's because the whole world, once the football season ends, you just can't wait for the tournament. And first tournament at home, you can't begin soon enough.
No, I know. No. And all the things that people thought would go wrong didn't go wrong. There weren't really any ticketing fiasco. There were fiascos. There were no serious outbreaks of hooliganism that people thought there would be. So actually, from there on in, off the pitch stuff went pretty smoothly.
The sort of perception of football at that time was still, it was interesting. Fantasy football had begun a couple of years previous, and Premier League must have been up and running by then. But you were absolutely right. There was sort of a nervousness of, and you look back on the football tournaments of the 80s, which were largely just your scenes of British fans being hit by riot police all across different European nations.
It's really contrasting. If you go back 10 years before 96 and 86, and English football is in the gutter. England are not able to compete in any European competition because of the violence that English football fans carry with them when they go into European competitions. Crowds are probably lower than they've ever been. Yet here we are 10 years later. The Premier League is inexistent. The money's coming in. Britpop is fueling this kind of cool Britannia. And here we have Euro 96. We're hosting a football tournament in this country for the first time since 1966. And it's a complete U-turn from 10 years before that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the tide turned Italian 90 good because, even though that wasn't completely sort of hooligan-free, as it were, it did. I was out there as a fan. So in a certain respect, you don't always capture what's happening back home when you're abroad as a fan, but by all accounts, there's a huge upsurge in support for the England team. There always is, but I just think it sort of crossed a bit of a divide then.
Yeah.
And Euro 96 had a chance to build on that. I think the song, Three Lines song, helped a little bit, maybe a lot. I don't know. I wasn't the best place to judge that, maybe. it's when I was at the sort of team hotel all the time. Thought it sounds great, but it's a little bit like being in a luxury prison.
Yeah.
It was out in the countryside, so all you saw in the outside world were 100 school kids every day at the top of the driveway for an autograph, and that's all you saw. There were no other guests there. You had exclusive use of the hotel. You got on a coach, went to training, came back again. I was obviously on the phone a lot. You had very little sense of what was going on outside. I did have to go into London one day, and I can remember, driving down Piccadilly and just being astounded at all the taxis with the with the flags in Georgia on, and the whole place just going quite taken aback. That doesn't really carry through. Yes, you see stuff on the telly, but it's not the same as being out on the streets and seeing what's really going on. So
it definitely felt like it crept up, actually, didn't it? Because you have that early. I mean, the tournament begins as almost all tournaments begin with with the exception of 1982 and Brian Robson's goal. I think every other England tournament up until that point, and many more afterwards, had begun with a disappointing opening game.
Yeah. This game was a real stinker, wasn't it, really? I mean, probably notable only really for, Shearer scoring and breaking his duck. So he got that monkey off his back. Again, I can't remember much of the details, but it was sort of disappointing, wasn't it, really? So,
Switzerland get that late penalty equaliser, and it really dampens the spirit. And I think you're falling back into that typical kind of mindset as an England fan. It's like, even the most optimistic going into Euro 96 would have been searching for any ounce of optimism after that Switzerland game. But I think the Scotland game, which is worth talking about in lots of detail, but I think there's a moment there, the missed penalty and the Gascoigne goal, which is the switch for everything that follows after that point. I think that's the moment where the whole thing turns into an absolute celebration of Englishness.
You don't need me to tell you about all the hype around the Scotland game, but I remember, as I was saying earlier, odd things that just stick in my mind. My seat for most games was right adjacent to the press box. I think 10 minutes before the kick-off, a Scottish journalist said to one of the English journalists, by the way, Scotland are going to try and score direct from the kick-off because they spotted Seaman likes to come to the edge of his area. And so the journalist then said to me, Steve, he said, Scotland doesn't try and score straight from the kick-off. And I thought, I'd better tell somebody about this. It sounds dark. I can't remember, but I did. I have one of those mobile phones, the Motorola phone with a massive aerial those days.
With the big,
goodness me. I'm just trying to think, who did I phone? I think it was probably one of the physios, because I knew he was in the tunnel. He wouldn't be completely tied up with anything. I said, look, can you tell Terry that the Scots are saying they're going to try and score direct from the kickoff, and tell David to get back on his 6 yards line. And whether they were going to or not, it might be an urban myth, but the message got through, and he didn't stand on the edge of his 18-yard box of kickoff. And the other thing was, again, in the warm-up, that Gazza was just, I mean, he was super hyped anyway, but he was just staring into the crowd, motionless. I didn't realise at the time he was looking for his fiancée in the crowd. Trying to spot one person in 100,000 crowd, good luck, And I remember saying, he just looked complete like he was in a trance. And I said to Terry, I said, look, have you seen him? I said, he doesn't look right. He said, don't worry, he's fine. He just knew him so well. And he was just in his own little world. And he just looked, if it been, members of the public, you would have said, can I help you, sir? Can I take, you to, so you can see the doctor? Well, no, that was that.
I mean, Gascoigne had taken absolute pelters, hadn't he, before that match. He was kind of, after the Switzerland game, there was wasn't there like a poll in one of the papers which said, he should be, 85% people think he should be out of the squad. And
really?
Footballing-wise, there was a question whether he was past his prime, I guess.
Yeah, I must admit, I don't doubt what you say, but it's just not something that sticks in my head. I remember more the anti-Shearer stuff.
Which is extraordinary.
Yeah, it does. The passing of time does seem extraordinary, doesn't it? 98, the Gazza stuff then sticks out more for me. And there's only I'll tell you about a bit later on. But I think he was chief suspect for the Cathay Pacific incident. Nobody ever got on him. So again, it was all about getting from match to match. On this sort of all this background noise. You just wanted the games to kick off, and then the rest was done.
Yeah. The Scotland game begins quite well. Shearer, having not scored for 21 months, with people thinking he's not worth his place in the team, which, as you say, seems extraordinary.
Just on that, though, Graham, I mean, I can understand the debate behind it at the time, because he's not scoring, but I mean, Venables absolutely stood by him firm and kind of made it clear he was his number 9. But this is a golden period for English strikers as well. You've got the emergence of Robbie Fowler, who was a wonderful number 9. Les Ferdinand, who's absolutely smashing it for Newcastle at this particular moment. And then you've got Andy Cole, also coming through Newcastle, just signed to Manchester United. So there was a lot of quality behind Shearer who were regularly scoring, and not even mention Ian Wright, who was still at that time a fantastic footballer. So I kind of understand why there was pressure on Shearer, because he hadn't been able to get that goal until the Switzerland game. But fair play to Terry Venables. He was clear. He was clear that Shearer was the man. He believed in him from the very beginning. He stuck by him right through up until that Switzerland game.
That's absolutely right. And to be honest, there was nobody in the squad questioning him either. That it was just outside. It was just outside noise. And everybody knows he's as tough as on foot. Shearer. He's mentally very resilient, physically tough as well. So that was it was very doubt. Yeah, I mean, looking back, we were spotted for choice, weren't we? Stan Collymore was also a contender then as well. I mean, he was having a hot streak. So even though he wasn't out and out striker, Nick Barmby was the bright future.
Yes,
unfortunately, Nick Barmby, Euro 96 was pretty much almost as good as it got, really, wasn't it? I think he suffered badly from injuries, didn't he? And then he never really got past being a bright young thing, did he? I might be doing a complete disservice, but that was certainly in terms of his international career.
I think he enjoyed the trip to China as well, because I think he bagged a couple of goals in one of the friendlies.
That Scotland game, it sort of all suddenly changes in this unbelievable 2 minutes, doesn't it? Where you go from Tony Adams lunging in.
Yes, God. Do you remember Ewan Geller trying to claim credit for moving the ball as well, which is utter nonsense?
Whenever you get to tournaments, there's always these people who kind of piggyback it, aren't they? It suddenly takes on. But Uri Geller has to be the least likely one that you could have called beforehand. I reckon Uri Geller's going to get involved.
But with a goal, I can remember I had a nice clear line of sight when Gazza got the ball, and I thought, there's only one thing he can actually do here, and that's to chip it over him and go, but he won't do that, will it? Of course he can't. Of course he did. It almost just seemed like the only daft, but for a split second, it seemed like the only logical thing to do. It's exactly what he did, And I didn't really focus on the celebration, what the celebration was. I only saw it on the telly later, and that was quite clever, wasn't it? That vintage chair recreation. That was really clever.
When they were talking about it afterwards, they say, we agreed that whoever scored, that would happen. Although, when Shearer scores, that doesn't happen. In fact, although curiously, I'm not sure Shearer does his... I think he's so excited to score after 21 months. I'm not sure he remembers his rather dull kind of on to one side celebration.
You're absolutely right, Graham. He does. I think he kind of goes off and gives the 2-arm salute. He forgets who he is for a moment.
Does he do the one with a sort of the exaggerated high knee lift run? Called that another goal?
Yeah, I do remember that celebration. I can't remember what it was. It might be that one. Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah. Wow, here we are learning that Alan Shearer actually does have a varied goal celebration. Only a few pods ago, I was absolutely condemning him as the worst goal celebration in the history of English football. But I need to take that back, and I owe an apology to Alan Shearer.
That was a Saturday game, wasn't it? Scotland. It was a Saturday game. Holland went on Wednesday night. Looking back at the records, I didn't realise we only needed a point against Holland. But I think in everybody's mind, they were, the tournament favourites, weren't they? And it was a pretty awesome looking lineup. It's pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah, they've been to the World Cup finals, semi-finals, in '94, apparently losing out to Brazil. they would repeat that as well in 98. And they also were made up by a lot of that incredible Louis van Gaal Ajax team that had been to 2 Champions League finals on the road, 95 and 96. But in classic Dutch behaviour, they've had a bit of a blowout, and Edgar Davids, who's been categorised as a low-grade player, has stormed off after the second game in Switzerland, and there's a bit of disgruntledness in the Dutch camp, but that shouldn't take anything away from the England performance that day, because it's absolutely fantastic. But you're right, Steve. I mean, the Dutch were the favourites going into that tournament, and it was a fantastic team. And I still rank this probably one of the greatest England games I've ever seen in my life and ever witnessed in my life.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think most people of our sort of generation, it's that, and it's the 5-1 in Munich against Germany. But I think this one, in terms of the complete performance, easily takes it. I think it was a better all-round performance, completely, unexpected, and we just took them to the cleaners, didn't we? Really, just outplayed what was supposedly the best footballing side, certainly in Europe, possibly in the world. What had happened, Venables had always realised that this was going to be the game, and all his focus had been on his game plan for this one, to his credit, and that was the one, and it all came together. Funny enough, I don't know what you thought. The one I always remember is the Shearer goal where Sheringham lays it off. Yeah, I still think Sheringham should have taken it on himself. I don't quite understand why he didn't. But
yeah, I think that's classic Teddy Sheringham, though. I think he was just an absolute team player. I mean, incredible ability, incredible intellect on the football pitch. The closest thing, I think, at the time that England had to Dennis Bergkamp in terms of players that could just pull the strings in the last third. But it's interesting, because it is a carbon copy, I think, almost of the goal that Shearer scores against Switzerland. Because Shearer's at an angle and Sheringham's square, and Shearer can lay it into Sheringham to probably have a simple tap in. But Shearer shoots from an incredible angle with incredible power, as Shearer did, and he scores. But then you've got 2 games later where, you're right, Sheringham's in the same position and he should be absolutely nailing it. But the pass is absolutely brilliant. And the finish as well from Shearer. It's an absolutely brilliant finish. But yeah, I agree. I think of the 4, that's my favourite as well. I absolutely just love it. Aesthetically, it just looks so nice.
Yeah, yeah.
You've also got this thing where you have, when goals come in clusters, there's this feeling where almost anything is possible. So you get these 3 goals in sort of 9-10 minutes, and part of you can't take in that we keep scoring, but you get the 4, and in the back of your mind you're thinking, this could be 8 or 9. This could be, this is. It just looks like every time we're going forward.
Yeah. But in a way, it almost got better, because I think the goal that Holland got also meant Scotland were out, which was brilliant. So that was a real cherry on top. My sort of non-game memory from that one, like, is being I was in the tunnel. This is the old memory. The players' tunnel then was like this. Yeah, size of the tunnel was huge. I was in there when the Dutch team came up to do their sort of warm up, and I'm standing next to Brian Robson. He took one look at them, and they were big, massive. Even Bergkamp, who you don't think on the pitch doesn't look like a big guy, he was built. They all were. And if I remember, Brian Robson said, they've been growing them in greenhouses. They're massive. How is this? Robbo's, not exactly a midget. And he looked at these guys and think, these guys are massive. How are we going to call it? We know they're good players, but they're physically imposing as well. And they were just a big team, they're a little bit offbeat, but that was my abiding memory. And these players are really massive. Didn't count for anything there. Skinny Teddy sorted them out.
And what you've got by this stage is suddenly, I mean, they are incredible scenes where, England have produced like this, it's the most stellar style win that they've had. It's a shock win. They're through. You have all this excitement about the home tournament, and you've got this anthem, the football coming home anthem, in the ground from sort of almost from nowhere.
Yeah, but was it that game or had it? I know was that the one where the crowd was singing it at the end? as well.
I think it was the Scotland game was the one that it
Yeah.
really was the first time it taken off. And certainly by the time we get to the Spain game, I was went to the Spain game, and that was pretty much all we sang. Throughout the whole thing was, so by that stage it had become.
I think it was the Dutch game where it really kicked on. I think I remember reading quotes in 4-4-2 that Darren Anderson was, he had 10 minutes left on the game, and even he was singing in his head because it was just all around him. And you've got that classic combination of, England have won in this incredible style. There's no way back for the Dutch. They've won a group in a major competition as well, which doesn't happen that often. And you've got that balmy June evening under the Wembley floodlights. I think that whole cocktail has just created this incredible spirit where everyone who's anyone wants to be a part of it.
It was like a collective sort of pinch yourself moment, wasn't it? You can tell when you see people at any game when you celebrate a goal, and when you celebrate a goal when it's a good goal, but when it's like an unbelievable goal. And that match was an unbelievable match, and everybody was just looking at them, looking around, saying, "Did that really just happen?" The trouble is, when you're there working, like I was working, a lot of it passes you by. It's stuff like you've got to, you got to be in certain places by a certain time, and so people often say to me, "Oh, do you remember that time when?" I said, "No, I don't. I just remember odd things like Juan Watson said, "Well, they're in a greenhouse." It's just like.
Steve, even though you're on the clock during that game, did you not lose a little bit of yourself in the game? Were you not carried away with it in terms of?
Oh yeah, no. I think my sort of regular seat was I was either one of two places. I could either be adjacent to the dugout if there was a spare place, or I was like adjacent to the press seats. Now, it's not the one thing for the press to go. If England score, but of course, with my colleagues we could, and we did.
Didn't stop Tony Cover.
But no, it was one thing that used to really annoy me was like last 5 or 10 minutes I had to get down to the tunnel to organise the TV interviews, and then you're just thinking, when shall I go? When shall I go? Is it too early now? Because there's always going to be like 2 or 3 minutes where you just couldn't see anything, and you're just thinking, when do I time my one? It was always sort of nerve-wracking and annoying to try and get down there in the most efficient, not missing the game time process. For the last 10 minutes, I had my game head on and had to sort of get to where I needed to be.
Jamie, it's funny you're talking about that sort of balmy summer feel. Summer goes down as my greatest one. That's the one you just kind of... In my mind, every night was gloriously sunny, and you had the whole Britpop thing going on and everything. But it's funny how sometimes your memories are slightly different. So I looked at the top 10 on the 23rd of June in 96, and Ocean Colour Scene, who were number 10, I think we were about the only Britpop-ish band who were there. Three Lions was number 2. Number 1 was Killing Me Softly by the Fugees. But 3, 4, and 5, you had Peter Andre, Mariah Carey, and Celine Dion. Now, that's not, they were in the top 5.
Maybe she can get away from Britpop.
I'm going to jump forward. I said on a musical theme. I'll jump forward into mine. Again, one of my favourite times was the day after the Spain game. It was a Sunday, not much going on. Stuart Pearce wanted to go and see the Sex Pistols play at Finsbury Park. There was a big festival at Finsbury Park. So Stuart Pearce asked Terry Venables, could he go? And he said, and Venables straight to the chin for 5 seconds. But, well, yeah, okay then, but as long as somebody from the FA goes with you. And I was sort of, I was lurking. I thought, and so I got to chaperone Stuart Pearce and some young central defender by the name Gareth Southgate. That was a bit weird, even though it seemed like chalk and cheese. Stuart Pearce and Gareth Southgate were good mates. So we got an FA card to Finsbury Park, backstage passes, Sex Pistols, Skunk and Nancy, etc., etc. And it was just all a bit surreal because the guys who got the biggest cheer of the day was Stuart Pearce and Gareth Southgate because they were like ushered on stage, and afterwards we went back to the Sex Pistols caravan. It was what I have to say, it was packed. There were certain family members were, biting off beer bottle tops with their teeth. Some interesting scars on faces from the entourage, and it was just so surreal. If anybody got a photo and seen Pierce and Southgate in this Sex Pistol caravan rammed, surrounded by people downing bottles of Stella the day after, it was something else. It was that was memorable. Yeah, we had a curfew. We had to be back in time. We had to be back for 7, something like that, and we were. That was great fun.
Just because Pierce, the only reason there's such a great reaction, I guess, is because the Spain game, whilst there were 5 players who take penalties for that day, there's only one person whose penalty you remember, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was his own redemption day, wasn't it? That was the game was really tense, though, wasn't it? I can just remember it was a very.
It was horrible.
Yeah,
that's the only game I went to as a fan. I was super excited to have taken a chance on tickets. And that was one of the things around the England-Holland game. We bought tickets to the quarterfinal, and there was this outside chance that England would be playing in it if, by any chance, England beat Holland, which somehow they do. And so we ended up going to this quarterfinal. But by this stage, the expectation is really high. I mean, it's unbelievable. We play Spain. And the way we played, you're actually expecting to win, which it definitely didn't happen much then. And as you say, the game was really much more like the Switzerland game in terms of how they're playing. And Spain do score quite an onside goal, which is disallowed as well.
I've never a game I've never watched back. I've just got a vague memory of Spain having a really good chance, which they should have scored from, but all that I can't remember. Apart from being incredibly tense and nip and tuck. Oh, and the penalty, I can tell you a thing about it. Yeah, I've got a good pop quiz question for you. What is the link between an all-time Wimbledon great and England's progression in that tournament?
Oh, I know it. I've got it.
Graham,
do you want some time on it?
An all-time Wimbledon great and England's progression.
Yeah. Okay.
Give me a clue on who's the great.
The guy who missed the decisive penalty for Spain is called Miguel Nadal.
Oh, Nadal!
Uncle of Rafael Nadal.
Of course it is. Oh, was
Uncle
he?
Miguel. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Nadal gets all of the credit for putting England into the quarterfinals, but Herrera as well, the great player for Real Madrid. He misses the first one, which gives England the advantage. And then England's penalties are fantastic. And Pierce, who goes third, I mean, you mentioned it, Steve, it is redemption. I mean, there's a man who's been carrying around pain for 6 years, and it just pours out of him. The image of Pierce it's just brained in my head. I can still see it now, the relief and the anger and all of that kind of crying himself to sleep so many nights because of that thing in 1990. And there he is, finally putting that to rest.
That Pierce celebration, I can always pinpoint where I was sitting when I was watching that game, or standing at that point. Because Stuart Pearce was directly looking at me when he does his kind of punches. But of course, I suspect there are 80,000 other people in the ground who claim the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine all these incredible games came together so quickly, isn't it? Because this was a Saturday game, wasn't it? After Wednesday against Holland. It just seemed. And then before you know it, you're into the semi-finals, aren't you? And it's just...
And of course, at this stage, you're almost... In fact, I saw an interview with Tony Adams where he's saying, he's asked, who do you want to play in the semi-final? And whether he kind of means it or not. He said, I quite like Germany because we're putting to bed quite a lot of demons, that we beat Holland, we finally won a game on penalties.
Yeah,
why not end the curse of Germany?
Yeah,
and your point, actually, Steve, about how quickly the games came, it's actually right. The mood turns so quickly because
absolutely.
Presumably it's less than 2 weeks since we've had this really staid game against Switzerland, and you think, I know what's coming now, and this isn't going to end well.
The other thing, sorry, I just remembered something I'll mention, which is a little bit off the wall, and it's before the Spain game. And me and my colleagues, we had a little office within the hotel, and the players would come and go. But on the Friday afternoon before the Saturday game against Spain, Gazza came in and sat down and started hitting the phones, and I thought, what is he doing? It was turned out he was planning his own wedding, and he was trying to source a band of Scottish bagpipemen. Was he talking about a sort of pre-smartphone, almost quasi pre-internet age when you started dial 192? So he was just manically ringing up people trying to find some bagpipe players for his wedding. It was sort of thing like, it's a sort of task that if you're the best, he should have been the best man's job, and even if you're the best man, you would have delegated to somebody else, wouldn't you? And here you had your England's pivotal player, 24 hours before playing Spain, all he's got in his mind is where to find a band of bagpipe players for his wedding. And it was just mad. It's just not...
That is crazy. Mind you, I guess his only option would have been to task Jimmy Five Bellies or Danny Baker with the task, so maybe he was best doing it himself.
That was it. It was quite, it was just bonkers, when you think all the players out there, when you're going to have literally a one-track mind about the game. Nah, there's other things going on. Yeah, so there's that. Yeah, Sunday afternoon at Finsbury Park, and then suddenly on the was it Wednesday or Thursday? It must have been Wednesday. Thursday night.
A few games, a rare England performance in the grey kit. You don't often see, you think of most of the famous England ones I tend to think of them in red, really, more than anything. But the grey kit, and unbelievably, that game starts extraordinarily well. I mean, we're ahead 2 minutes into the game, and you think, this is football genuinely is coming home.
Yeah. I didn't realise, again, until I looked at the stats, I didn't realise the Kuntz, well, I pronounced it right, I know people pronounce it another way, scored in about 15 minutes, didn't he? I think it was quite early on.
Yeah.
Again, my memory would be that it was quite a long time. It wasn't. We actually in the lead for a very short time.
Yeah, exactly like you. I was thinking that Germany equalised sort of 20 minutes from the end of the second half. Potentially.
Yeah. In reality, very little happened until the last 10 minutes, didn't you? Because then you had the Gazza miss, and then everything hitting the post was in extra time, wasn't it?
We do get a slightly benevolent decision. Germany score what looks like a pretty clear header from a corner, but in extra time, but quite gloriously. You can clearly hear the ref's whistle before it goes in, so not quite as bad.
This was a period of football where FIFA and UEFA were using the golden goal as well. So people had remarked the golden goal would kill the excitement going into extra time because they'd be too nervous. The teams would be too nervous because, give away a goal and that's the end of the match. And for me, I mean, maybe it was the last 10 minutes, Steve, but I don't know, for what in my memory it's kind of etched in that the whole 30 minutes was just open, exciting, entertaining football. And maybe I've just got carried away in the euphoria for the last 10 minutes because it was just end-to-end stuff. And, Gascoigne almost literally a whisker away from, I mean, how he misses it, I don't know. I mean, I've watched it so many times and it seems harder to miss than to score, to be honest. But, yeah.
It's oddly, Jamie, it's completely the opposite to the Spain experience. So the Spain game, virtually neither side leave their own half. They are so nervy about it, and there's like an inevitability that let's go to penalties. Whereas, as you say, this one at the very least has these unbelievable clear-cut moments. And the Gascoigne one, it's just this like tiny little, because he obviously he sort of thinks the keeper's going to get a touch on it, and he just temporarily pulls back because he thinks it's better there, and that just tiny break of stride. And of course, as you see him sliding in, you just think narrative klaxon is going off. This is his tournament. This is the moment. And who better to get that goal? Everything seems written. And I sort of think the moment he doesn't get on the end of that, maybe that's the moment you think that the penalties are going to end in a more traditional English way.
Steve, out of interest, what was the players in Terry Venables' mindset going into that semi-final? Were they upbeat and confident on the back of everything.
I think they were. To be honest, they never weren't, if you know what I mean. But there was no, you never had any sense of fear or trepidation. I mean, there was a sense that the Holland game was going to be a challenge. They were more confident going into the Germany game than they were against Holland. Yeah, there's certainly no question of anyone being particularly, overawed. Because, to be honest, it wasn't a vintage German team, really, looking back. So we should have done it, frankly. We should have done it. So if we got past, I don't think any question, we would have certainly been our favourites, wouldn't we, in the for the final? That's for sure. But yeah, no, I mean, other than the sense that it's Germany and it's always going to be difficult, etc., etc., there was no particular, trepidation at all. And I think, well, again, my memory is, we were pretty front-footed through most of the game. We didn't have our own way, but we certainly weren't cowed at all in that game. And we should have won it,
A lot of that credit goes down to Terry Venables. I'm absolutely certain of that. I mean, we touched on it. He was an absolute genius, and it's great to hear that he had that. Steve, you were saying earlier, they had that kind of old school mentality, and you definitely see that his man management skills. But he was tactically brilliant. I mean, what he did at Barcelona previously, and we didn't even talk about it, the tactical change against Scotland, where he brings in Jamie Redknapp and he switches the system when it was needed to, at half time. He definitely was in tune with how to tactically win football matches, and his career proved that. So he was the right man at the right time. It's just sad that he'd already announced before the tournament that he was going to move on.
I mean, looking back, it was a terrible waste of his talents that he didn't stay on. It really was, because, frankly, that was he never came close to, in his career, to having that sort of profile and momentum, I guess. Then, he could and should have stayed on, in my book. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what would have happened if he'd stayed on, frankly. Really difficult is keeping everybody on a even keel when you're, all stuck together for long periods of time in a hotel. It all sounds like great fun, but, you look at tournaments, even now, Southgate, he's only mentioned it once or twice, but he talks about the need for players to be good tourists. And it doesn't matter, reading between the lines, there are certain players who aren't picked anymore, and you just know the reason they're not picked, because they're not the right people to have around a hotel for 4 or 5 weeks. Or other people don't like them being around, or it just doesn't fit. And it's almost got nothing to do with form. It's just what they do to the mood around the place. They don't need to sound terribly important, but it is really important. It only takes one person to become a pain in the arse, and it just,
Edgar Davids.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get to that stage, you get it even with something there with, I don't know whether it's pick Jordan Henderson, and everyone's picking their best 22 players based on who the best 22 players are. But, Oxford had it with, yes, amazingly, I've managed to get an Oxford reference in here. James Henry, you played for Reading, you would see Steve, and this season he didn't play a lot, but he's just clearly good to have around as a character. Yeah. You get players like that who have who influence things beyond what they do on the pitch.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, there's a guy who I worked with, Steve Stone, who was a really lovely guy to have around the place. I think he got off the bench maybe once around the tournament, but always smiling, always happy.
And you're doing that in quite a short window of time. You only have actually a relatively short period of time with players. You can't really afford something that kind of upsets the apple cart.
No, that's right. I mean, looking back, it was quite an extrovert group. The only player I would say was particularly quiet was Sol Campbell. I mean, he was very young at the time. He was only 21, I think. And Sol was always a bit, he's quite enjoyed his own company. Nothing wrong with that. But he was just sort of from the silent type. I remember in France 98, he quite liked to just go off alone and have a coffee in the French cafe, read a book or whatever. So he was probably the quietest one. And the other end of the scale, you had Robbie Fowler, and him and McManaman were like nitro and glycerine. They just sort of wound each other up. And more to the point, McManaman used to be his full guy, and it was just. I don't know if you remember, there was a scene where they had a little TV studio at Burnham Beaches, and So they would do interviews with Terry or the players, and they'd be guarding the backdrop. And there was an occasion when we found that he decided he'd sort of dress up in a white sheet and pretend to be a ghost or something, and ran up and down in the garden behind him. And Venables was not very happy about that. That was typical.
For whatever reason, Steve, that sticks in my mind. I remember seeing that. I think it was on like ITN or ITV News or something like that. And I do remember in the background, you've got this ghostly shape behind Terry Venables.
Yeah, that was Fowler. There was like a squad of seniors who used to spend most of their time sitting in the lobby playing scrambled. And that was Southgate, Sherman, Adams. Yeah, those sort of guys, slightly more serious guys, slightly sort of in their late 20s, early 30s. I mean, playing Scotland doesn't sound very rock and roll. It's what they did, and they spoke quite seriously about the game and that sort of thing. Well, most others, either Gazza and Seaman would go fishing. Most of the others would just, pop out. Yeah, so it was they were a pretty solid bunch.
I think 7 or 8 club captains as well in that squad.
Yeah, the one thing I can remember, there was a little bit of tension, if that's the right word, was there was quite a big call with David Platt. It was going to be Platt or Adams to be captain. David Platt had been a mainstay in the team. I think I might be saying primarily captain. But then he got to the stage, coming to the tournament, he wasn't guaranteed a spot in the team. And Adams got the captaincy. And of course, as their Arsenal teammates, that was what he felt slightly awkward from the outside looking in. And I can remember Tony saying, yeah, he's finally made the right decision there. So
this is a complete throwaway comment. I don't even need to say it, but it just landed in my head. I mean, of all the players in that squad, most of them you kind of see or hear doing things in football, around football. You never hear anything about David Platt. I couldn't even tell you. Because he had a brief management spell, and then you never hear anything from him. And such a high-profile footballer, not just in England, but in Italy as well.
Did he manage Forest, I think?
Yes.
And he was coaching at Man City as well. But you're right. He used to be everywhere, didn't he? And he was on the TV as a pundit a lot. And he always struck me as managerial material. As did Tony Adams come to all that squad. If I put money on one player to be a manager, it would be Tony Adams.
Just going back to Terry Venables briefly, I always thought about him is he's almost the first time you've had, or the only time England in the FA have gone for the fans' choice or the popular choice. So when Clough never got the job, and Harry Redknapp, who I always thought would be a brilliant motivator of players at a tournament and get players to play with. They've always generally, and if you don't understand it, there's a lot of profile attached to that job, but they've generally gone with a safer choice. Whereas Venables was a very obvious one, but he's definitely, it's almost the only time England have had a tournament where they have been led by someone who the fans could really get behind as a manager.
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose Keegan's fairly popular.
Yes,
as an appointment.
Yeah, he was.
Whereas things didn't quite work out for him. As an appointment.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, this is going to be fine.
Blocks the Keegan years out.
Where Terry, I thought, was particularly good was that he didn't surround himself with yes men. For instance, Don Howe and Brian Robson had completely diametrically opposed views about how the game should be played. And so, these fascinating conversations, in the bar or around the dinner table, of which Don Howe and Brian Robson really disagree in front of Venables. But that was fine. And he would just take from it whatever he thought was right. He didn't mind that at all. And he just sort of picked out what's, it's a sweeping generalisation, but I suppose, Don Howe was, a more defensive mindset. And that was his job. He looked after the defence where Robbo was a bit more, let's go and score more goals than them, and because we can. So it's a massive oversimplification, but that was sort of, the polar opposites. and they'd each come up with good points, and Terry would just let them get on with it and cherry pick what suited him. And that sounds simple, but it's quite a good man management skill that to do that and keep a happy ship while you're doing it.
I've been putting this off obviously because I don't want to have to think about the penalties like that, and that this dream ends. And the end of the story is Germany take a series of fantastic penalties, and it all goes wrong. This disaster. The sort of, I mean, you're working there at that point, so I do obviously the logical thing and just switch the lights off and sat in the dark for 2 hours with my head in my hands. But I mean, if you've actually got to do something, I mean, how difficult? How difficult was that?
Well, that's it. It came back to what I was saying earlier. That the last few minutes of the match were always really difficult to enjoy, because then you've got to think, well, okay, how's this going to pan out? Who should be saying what, etc., etc. And of course, you've got TV rights holders who not only want interviews, they're sort of contractually entitled to do so, and not everybody is that keen to talk to them quite often. And so that was always, so I had to go from being elated, devastated, to get a professional head on and think, and try and be an even broker between player who wants to keep the dressing room door in, and a TV rights holder who's saying, okay, we need to speak to somebody in 3, 2, 1. It's quite, it's a bit of a dampness. But of course, that night, there's only one story in town. It's Gareth Southgate, and who was, utterly devastated. It got to the stage where the whole area, the sort of dressing room tunnel area, was pretty much empty, and there was only myself, Brian Robson, and Gareth Southgate, and he was, frankly, in a daze. I was sort of making the point, the case that you've got to talk about it sometime, and you might as well do it now and get it over with, And he, literally didn't know where to turn, and he asked Brian Robson, and unfortunately, Brian agreed with me. He said, just crack on and do it. And he did a couple of interviews. It was the right thing to do. Very quick, even though it's really difficult. It's very easy to say do it. I wouldn't have liked to do it, but he did it, and he'd always been. The two absolute stalwarts of doing that sort of thing was David Platt and Gareth Southgate. So he'd more than done his turn. It's very difficult for him to do it, but he did it. And then there's a little back stairwell that goes from that area up to where the players' lounge is, and it goes up past the Royal Box and VIP area. And I remember going up the stairs with him, and suddenly there was some police coming down the other side, and behind the police was John Major, still just PM at the time, and so John Major runs directly into Gareth Southgate and puts a hand on his shoulder. I mean, he meant well, but he said, he basically said, oh, never mind Gary, what? Hang on, no one calls Gareth Southgate Gary, just so he meant well. Calling Gary in that moment just means. And that was that really. And then it was straight back to the hotel, and some treat was partaken. This will make you laugh. The only person whose mind appeared to be elsewhere was Gary Neville, who was shaking his head saying, we've got to make sure we win the Premier League again next season. His head had instantly moved on to Man United and what are they going to do the next season, and everywhere else was complete morgue. He was planning ahead, typical busy Gary. This thing, whose mindset was completely elsewhere already, where there's this massive weight going on,
I thought you were going to say it was Paul Gascoigne on the phone to the bagpipers again.
Yeah, I remember seeing a sort of rather cross-eyed Paul Ince in the hotel car park at 9 o'clock next morning. I don't think he'd been to best. Yeah, and that was that. Then it's all over. Bang. That's off and home. I had the chance to go to the final, and I nearly didn't. But I literally made a very late call to go. Probably the right thing to do. But
I was going to ask you about that because, again, like I did the fan thing, which is So if England get knocked out in the quarterfinals, I've normally got it back together again to watch the final. But going into the semi-finals, it's still all too raw, and I don't think I watched the final.
No, I didn't really want to go, but I just thought, hang on a minute, it's a European Championship final. I'm living in London. It is in London. I've got a free ticket. If I don't go, I'll probably regret not going. So I better go. Do I really, really, really want to be there? No, not really. Yeah.
There was a final that had that horrible golden goal winner, Oliver Bierhoff, and it's a scrappy, horrible goal as well. I mean, there's nothing nice.
I mean, it's weird, isn't it? It happens because it's almost like a delayed shock. Nobody really realises that's it, do they? Or didn't.
Yeah.
And of course, you can imagine today that's still held. You'd probably have 5 minutes of VAR, wouldn't you, deciding whether or not that it was all over. Yeah. No, it was a strange one. The saving grace was in the days and weeks that followed that so many people coming up to you who were not necessarily football fans and just saying, "Oh, that was terrific," we really enjoyed that. That was great. And of course, it didn't feel particularly great at the time, but you just realise that had that knock-on effect that you hadn't realised when you were sort of in the middle of it.
Yeah, the legacy of what it did, and actually there was so much theatre about the way things happened. It almost built it up into a greater story, and exactly as you say, that this bit where it's actually over a relatively short period of time. It's not like the World Cup we're going to have next time around, which is going to go on for about 4 months as they basically have every nation in the world.
No, it's actually, it's only during this conversation that I realised it was actually like Saturday, Wednesday over. It was an awful lot of massive games in a very short space of time, wasn't it? Was it Holland, Spain, Germany inside 8 days? Wow. Yeah.
Three of the most iconic games for all sorts of reasons that we've ever had. Within 8 days. Exactly. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, we should get to ranking great England side. We've got we rank our team to 5 categories, from all-time greats at the top, true greats, touch of greatness, edge of greatness, and then the bottom one, blink greats. And Jamie, I'll let you go first, and you can give Steve a bit of time to think where he'd rank.
Well, in terms of the emotional wave this football team took me on through this tournament, absolutely all-time greats. Painfully watched, like all of us, have watched England in these major tournaments, and my optimism has started in a place of we're going to do it to slowly evaporated. But this team changed that, and it kind of gave us an incredible journey, albeit an inevitable ending, losing on penalty kicks to Germany. There's some fantastic moments that I still remember now. I mean, Steve, we do research for these things as you would expect, and my research on this was quite light because I still vividly remember this tournament so well, and I still vividly remember this team so well. It's ingrained in my psyche. It definitely has some legacy attached to it, not necessarily a football legacy, but a political legacy, because Tony Blair definitely jumped on the bandwagon and was able to return Labour to office just a few months after, 8 or 9 months after this particular tournament finished. And, Chris Waddle and Stuart Pearce, they were able to renegotiate their Pizza Hut contract and get Gareth Southgate on board. So it had a fairly happy ending for Gareth Southgate. And, he's gone on to become, I think, an incredible manager. And I just hope this summer he's a little bit more risky. And I think that would be enough to maybe change the history of our fortunes in the Euros. So where do I rank them? I don't think they're all-time greats, even though I feel that way. I don't even think I can put them in the second category as true greats because they have come short. It definitely, this is where we start, Graham. It's definitely better than the England 82, which we put in the 4th category, edge greatness. But for me, this is an absolute touch, a master touch of greatness, an incredible 2.5, 3 weeks of watching the nation do us proud. So I'm going to kick us off, rambling away in the 3rd bracket, soon to be changed, touch of greatness.
Yeah, I mean, I would go edge of greatness because literally they were on the edge. But in terms of the game, the one game, I think that the England-Holland game was greatness. It's still, to me, the best England performance I've seen in my lifetime. But I almost think, by definition, edge of greatness because they were on the edge. To win, Is that loud? Am I being too literal?
Yes, absolutely, it does. That is what they treat. They were edge of greatness. There's definitely some true greatness there for the Holland win, and then I think the legacy of what they've done, whether you can attach it to just this England team, or whether it's the whole Euros, or whether it's the Sun, or whether it was Beneil and Skinner, the legacy of it is extraordinary.
But then we're talking about lots of different things, and we're talking about the cultural impact as well, aren't we? I mean, to me, Italian 90 had a fantastic cultural impact. For some, I think that was a turning point in the perception of the game of the whole as this country. Yeah. And this one took another step. So in terms of sort of cultural impact, massive. But we're talking about different things, aren't we? We're talking about football teams. But in that football team, when you break it down, it wasn't, for instance, as strong as the England squad of the early noughties, was it? With your Ferdinands and your Rooneys and et cetera, et cetera. Who were the great England players? Well, Shearer, Adams, Gascoigne. But after that, you're talking about good, solid 50 cap merchants, for want of a better term. But not those absolute England legends as players, but as a unit for a period of time. So it changed quite drastically just 2 years later, hasn't it, really, in terms of the makeup of the team. Again, I mean, that's down to Venables, isn't it, making the best of what he had. Anderton was an excellent player. Fans didn't particularly like him. I didn't think what he was very clever at was one touch for a winger. His one touch playoffs were. Venables used to say that wasn't in the team for his dribbling ability. It's his one touch play.
As he demonstrated, he set up Paul Gascoigne's goal in Scotland. It's that kind of looping angled ball to put Gascoigne into the space.
Yeah, and I think a lot of fans, wanted him to beat three players and get to the final and whatever. He didn't do that. I'll tell you who was absolutely. You look at those Gary Neville crosses.
Wonderful crosses for Gary Neville.
Yeah, but apart from that, doing them down, there was a team of excellent players, not a team of great players, I don't think.
It's caught somewhere between. I do take your point. The turning point, the tournament that put England back on the map was Italian 90. This is a wider story, but I think for the team, glorious. Whilst they touched some really great heights, maybe that's what I've just said. They touched some great heights. So maybe we should say England Euro 96 touch of greatness somewhere in the middle. I think. Yes, when we came up with this concept, we hadn't really fully thought out that touch and edge were very close. They probably mean the same thing.
It seems a good idea at the time.
We might have to rebrand them at some stage.
Maybe. Kind of a different ranking system.
Steve, that has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing some of your memory of what is like just such a wonderful tournament.
That's cool insight, but it's just always rather old memories, things that stick in your mind.
Steve, it's been wonderful listening to your first-hand accounts of actually being there, feeling it, living it with the team as close as you are to the manager, the coaching staff, and the brilliant Don Howe. It's just been an absolute thrill just hearing your first-hand accounts, and thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Right. Good luck with the edit. That's what I say. We've gone on
as ever. As always.
Yeah.
As
you
always,
could
a
insert
challenge.
that to every single episode we do.
That's football.
So we are going to do something super special. We're going to make this a bit of a two-parter because we've talked about England this week. Next week, we are going to do something like what considered for some time is the other teams that played in the Euro 96 tournament. I can't even remember them. And I certainly haven't even looked at the final. So we will be back next week with Euro 96 Part 2. Everyone but England.